Text Chapter 2 of Jin Yucheng's novel Flowers. 1. One night in early spring, Miss Wang and Hong King sat in silence after dinner. Miss Wang said, "What's the taste of my boring life?" Hong King said, "Here we go again." Miss Wang said, "Speaking of it, I have a little daughter, which is like a blank slate." Hong King said impatiently that he had already told my mother that she could move back here. Miss Wang said, "Forget it. We can still kiss him. I am going to raise another one." Hong King said, "It's impossible." Miss Wang said, "I want to raise it." Hong King said, "If he is born again, I will be fired from the public office." Ms. Wang said that since we got married, other people have wanted to have mistresses, but I just want to raise a little girl. Hong King interrupted and said, "My cousin in the country wants me to go for an outing. Let's go and relax together." Miss Wang said nothing. Hong King said that the scenery is good, the house is big, and there is plenty of food and accommodation. Miss Wang said that we were going together in two. Hong King said, "It's a world of two." Miss Wang said, "I think there is a three-person world." Hong King is silent. Miss Wang said, "I don't want to fall in love when I go to a poor place like this in the countryside. It has to be lively. Let me laugh." Hong King said, "Alternatively, invite Mr. Kang and his wife, 4 of them, to play cards against Tianmen." Miss Wang thought for a while and said, "Kang is always good, but Mrs. Kang is more clingy, and she always says that her husband is too old for her, which is annoying." Hong King said, "Either ask Li to go." Miss Wang said, "Opening a restaurant is equivalent to going to jail. And you can't escape. Besides, Li has a high vision and a good threshold. Forget it about small activities in such a poor place." Hong King said, "Either ask Rui and his wife to go together." Miss Wang snorted and said, "What's the point of 2 couples going on a spring outing and talking about it with a blank slate?" "I have to take a breather." Hong King is silent. Miss Wang said, "I think Rui's marriage is not going well. Every time she answers her husband's phone call, she looks strange and has a few wrinkles between her eyebrows. In the past, whenever she saw a bow, her skin would immediately become slippery." Hong King said that looking at a woman's thoughts, it turns out that she is looking at this place. Miss Wang said, "There is a woman outside." Hong King said, "What are you talking about?" "I heard from Mr. Kang that whether a woman's eyebrows are inverted or straight indicates whether it is hot or cold at night." Miss Wang smiled and said, "Mr. Kang is really awesome." "Okay, it's settled. Mr. Kang and Rui will be invited." Hong King said, "What? I am a couple plus 2 married men and women. This?" Miss Wang said, "Even talking about husband and wife, my daughter has been raised in vain." Hong King is silent. Miss Wang said that Mr. Kang went with Rui. The 2 of them looked at each other, and they probably saw something good, so I could smile. Hong King said that his wife has weird ideas. Mr. Kang is a stable person, and Rui is a married woman. So why do they have to get together and cause trouble? Miss Wang said, "Rui stole my business in the past, and I am still unhappy now. If I invite Rui again to go out in pairs for spring outings, I will not be able to hire Lei Feng." Hong King said, "It's really complicated." Miss Wang said, "That's it." Hong King said, Okay. I have always listened to the organization at work and my wife after get off work." Miss Wang smiled and said, "Stop talking nonsense. By the way, I like others to call Miss Wang. This time, Hong King will call her like this when we go out." Hong King is silent. Ms. Wang said that if I change my words, I will become younger. 2. It was a cold day in the south of the Yangtze River, with misty drizzle and wet clouds gathering everywhere. By the time everyone got on the train, the weather gradually improved. Mr. Kang said that spring outing is like a piece of cheesecake. It has a strong taste and can be eaten slowly, especially if you take a slow train. It is the best choice. Hong King said that there are few people. Time goes slowly. The scenery outside the window is slow, and the mood is pleasant. Mr. Kang said that spring is short, the cake is small, has many layers, and has a thick taste. So look at it slowly and sip it slowly. Mary laughs. The carriage is empty. For people sit down. Gatherings and activities often make people beautiful and energetic. Hong King and Mr. Kang are familiar with each other, and Miss Wang and Mei Rui are colleagues. They are both good at communication, laugh every time they talk, and have affectionate eyes. The train passed Jiaxing and continued to move slowly. Outside the window, rapeseed flowers seemed to have not yet bloomed. Green appeared in the yellow, the rice fields were green, and the willow branches were also green. As the words were spoken in detail, the scenery remained motionless. Spring brings sorrow. Where does spring return? Spring makes people calm, and it also makes people calm. 2 hours later, the train arrived in Yuhong. The 4 of them got off and took a bus, passing through Chongfu and Shimen, and arrived at Shuanglan ancient town. According to the plan, we will go to the market first. At this stage, the atmosphere was already lively. Everyone was giving money, and Ms. Wang was buying local chicken. Hong King bought vegetables, river shrimps, spring bamboo shoots, and spring leeks. Mr. Kang bought wine and waited for the stall owner to chop the silver carp head. Mei Rui, who was beside him, had already carried eggs, tubes, onions, ginger, vermicelli, Shuanglan dried beans, and handfuls of cress. Everything is in perfect harmony. Then, they hired a mechanical farm boat, with 2 benches side by side, and now Yingying sat down firmly. When the machine sounded, the boat entered the tributary of Taihu Lake. The small boat carries wine, and every water is fragrant. The waterway is wide and narrow, and the waves are vast. The white grass and reed leaves on both sides are close to each other, sliding over Mei Rui's chest, like a mist. The 4 of them raised their heads and saw mountains, as beautiful as the goddess of the moon. Water as bright as cheeks, endless mulberry fields and lotus root ponds. There were few sounds of people, just a breeze. Occasionally they heard the flapping of waterbirds' wings. They were speechless and set off towards a destination that was like a peach blossom garden. About 3/4 of an hour later, the boat arrived at Linshu. A lonely countryside appeared in front of me, cold and damp. There are some idle people at the end of the river bridge and a wild dog. Hong King's cousin has been waiting by the water for a long time. 4 people, 1 big and 1 small, got off the boat and followed their cousin, walking in a winding way in front of and behind the house, and then led into a courtyard. Everyone was startled at first. The 3-bay, 2-story old house had a couplet in front of the door, saying, "We just want to be united. Why should we be bright and spiritual?" The writing paper had turned white, the window sash was broken, and the courtyard was filled with messy tables, chairs, and coffee tables. Semi-finished product, crisscrossed, exposed to wind and rain for many years. My cousin said that 2 years ago I started a woodware business and made a small fortune. In the end, I lost all my capital. Hong King said that there is still such a thing. My cousin said that this batch of bare-chested woodware looks dirty, but the style is not bad. Dear friends from Shanghai, please help me take a look first. If there is a way out, my cousin and I will lose less. Miss Wang said. Everyone is silent. My cousin said, no need to be polite. If you like it, we can pick a few and take them back to Shanghai. Hong King waved his hand and said, no. Everyone said, no, no, no. My cousin climbed into the pile of wood and rummaged through it and said that it looked disgusting. If you sand it with sandpaper, mix it with water and paint, beat it several times, polish and wax it. That is, polish it. Mr. Kang said, yes, buy a piece of fragrant soap and rub it. Mairui glanced at Mr. Kang. Miss Wang turned her back and coughed hard, and her cousin stopped. Hong King said, calm down. My cousin woke up in surprise and said, by the way, please go in and sit down first. The 4 well-dressed men and women were inevitably disappointed when faced with the dilapidated scene. Mr. Kang whispered to Mairui, I just bought some small dishes and old wine. I was smiling and chatting happily. It was like eating wedding wine. I stepped into the crematorium, Mary said. It was like I came out of the sauna, fell into the iron drawer and was frozen quickly, with my chest touching my back, and my whole body was freezing. My cousin said, everyone, come in and sit down. Everyone walked into the kitchen in the living room and felt a little better. The interior scene was in the style of Yan Wenliang's kitchen. My cousin placed wontons in front of the stove. There was a Jiangnan-style double stove with a soup pot in the middle, mulberry firewood at the back, and a memorial tablet for the kitchen god. Couplets are pasted on both sides, and auspicious patterns are carefully traced. Near the window are a table, cupboards, and a water sink. Bamboo baskets with wind chickens, wind fish, etc. are hung on the beams. Everyone sat down at the 8 immortals table, and my cousin served for bowls of shepherd's purse and meat wontons. The 4 of them ate in silence. My cousin said that the business had lost money, so I basically settled in the town. This time, all the guests from Shanghai were coming, so I cleaned for a whole day. Miss Wang stopped biting the wonton and rolled her eyes at Hong King. My cousin said that at night, he would ask Hong King to cook some side dishes for everyone to eat and talk. So my aunt and I went back first. Everyone is silent. My cousin said that there are 2 large rooms upstairs, with all pillows and quilts. Each room has a large bed, and the door is closed tightly. 2 young couples, just right. As soon as my cousin said this, the spoons in the hands of 2 people fell into the bowl with a clang. Hong King suddenly smiled. Miss Wang said, "It's 13 o'clock. What's the point of being happy?" Hong King said, "You can't just smile." Mr. Kang said, "There must be laughter medicine in the wontons." Meili said the wontons really tasted good. Miss Wang said, "Cousin, don't worry, you 2 can go back." My cousin took out an old pair of mahjong. Mr. Kang was shocked when he saw it and said, old, really old. My cousin said, "In 1962, I produced 10 kilograms of foreign sweet potatoes and transferred them with a 3rd generation, her farmer." Mr. King appraised them and said that they were made of a whole piece of old bamboo, with the same color and surface, inlaid with old ivory, iron-engraved silver hooks, and simple brushwork. The property of the big landowner. My cousin said that he has a really vicious vision. This deck of cards belongs to the Zhou family, the big landowners here. The land reform divided the family property and distributed it to the poor peasants. 10 years later, the poor peasants were hungry, and 3 tin coins were not worth 2 tian. "Give me a basket of sweet potatoes to save my life." Hong King said, "It's important to eat the most. You can eat the sweet potatoes. If you bite the mahjong tiles, your teeth will fall apart." After the 4 of us finished eating the wontons, my cousin said that the side dishes have been prepared and will be stir-fried at night. That is, the chicken has been stuffed in the wok, so everyone can go upstairs to take a look. Hong King and Mairui went upstairs to look at the room and explained everything clearly. My cousin said, "Everyone should pay more attention when you return to Shanghai. I will always have there as a way out." Miss Wang said nothing. Mr. King said, "This house is for sale." My cousin said it was the bare furniture outside. Hong King said, "I know." So my cousin and aunt said goodbye and returned to town. Hong King closed the door, and Mairui came down from upstairs and said, "I was confused. I thought I was staying in a hotel." Miss Wang said, "I have always paid for everything Hong King does. There is not a single shower head, and there is a spittoon in the room." Damn it. Mr. Kang, sit down and play cards, for people took their seats. Mr. Kang said, "Take care of yourself as soon as you come. It's not early. Let's make a few rounds first." Hong King said that it would be better to go out for a walk and enjoy the rural scenery of Jiangnan. Miss Wang said, "Forget it. I have already seen this poor place all the way. Running around here and there, running here and there, and I haven't run enough yet, and I have to keep running." Mary said, "Let's talk after dinner." Mr. Kang said, "Turn on the light and touch the cards first." When I encountered this good deck of cards, I was determined. The 4 of them touched southeast, northwest, and tossed the dice. This deck of cards is focused in front of me. It looks antique, with 8 hands, some thick and some thin, focusing on the 4 worlds. Mr. Kang said that playing this card, she was either the eldest lady or the concubine. Hong King said, "Landlord, commander of the returning home corps, commander of the Loyalty and National Salvation Army, and later, director of the Poor Peasants Committee." Mary said, "There is more." Hong King said, "Women cadres, captain." Miss Wang said that now he is Mr. Kang. and his longevity is honking, Hong King said. There is also Xiaoda's wife. Everyone laughed, and after a few laps, Mr. Kang kept asking Mairui to eat in touch, and the checkout was made at 5:30. Mairui went alone, and his fans became very popular. Everyone is preparing dinner, Mr. Kang is cooking, and Mairui is doing the cooking. Several times when Hong King came to the stove, Miss Wang shouted, "Go and light the fire." Finally, everyone sat down. The side dishes were neither salty nor bland, paired with local rice wine and a wok of fish head with vermicelli skin. They ate it all slowly, then go out for a walk. It was completely dark, and the road was narrow and difficult to walk. Mr. Kang and Mairui were in front, and Mr. and Mrs. Hong King were behind. They arrived at an open world, full of mulberry fields and fresh air. Mr. Kang looked back and found that Hong King and Miss Wang had suddenly disappeared. Mary said, "Where are the people?" There were several dark stacks of straw around. Mairui called out, "Miss Wang." No one was seen. No one answered. The moon peeked out of the clouds. The surrounding fields became brighter. The straw stacks became darker. And there were dense mulberry fields in front of me. Mr. Kang found it funny and felt that the moonscape was particularly beautiful. Even if he was alone with Mairui, it would be okay. In Mr. Kang's eyes, Mairui treats others with dignity on the surface. But in fact, he makes smoke and rain, and his charming body hides the wind. He can't help but sigh that the night is really nice. Mary said, "Yes." Mr. Kang said that the silkworm farmers here are said to still follow the ancient method of bathing silkworms, sleeping for the second time, sleeping for the third time, and then raising the silkworms. Millie said, "The mulberry tree turned out to be so low." Mr. Kang said that in ancient times, mulberry was collected one by one. Later, the mulberry trees were deliberately dwarfed and cut off whole to feed the silkworms. Mairui Kanran said, "Remember, I have done several who silk business exporting to Japan and Milan, Italy." Mr. Kang said that people are really weird. Silkworm babies and big caterpillars have similar shapes. Squirrels and mice have the same faces, the first to make people happy, but the latter to make people disgusted at first sight. Mairui said, "I have raised silkworm babies. There is a big mulberry tree in Zhangjiazai on Beijing West Road, and my male classmates climb up it every year and pick them one by one." Mr. Kang said nothing. The two stood side by side, under the moonlight, surrounded by silence. Mr. Kang felt that Mairui was so close that he could smell the fragrance. The moon moved into a cloud and then came out. It was the so-called white moon. The moon hung in the sky, and the trees were hidden in the wind. Before Mr. Kang could speak, two people suddenly jumped out of the straw stacked diagonally opposite. Mairui was frightened and tightened his grip on Mr. Kang. Only when he saw that it was Miss Wang and Hong King did he let go. Hong King said, "Pick them one by one." "You can't pick them, right?" "It's scary," Mary said. Miss Wang dusted herself off and said, "It's really 13 o'clock in Hong Kong, so you drag me into the straw." Mr. Kang said that as soon as it got dark, Hong King wanted to steal women. Hong King said, "Grabbing and dragging." The woman was scared on the surface but happy on the inside. Ms. Wang said that she wanted to learn from the savages who jumped the queue and settled in the barren mountains to make a living and play open-air poigao, Millie said. "What do you mean?" Mr. Kang said it was yeah. Hong King said, "This is romance." Ms. Wang said with a smile, "I really wanted to hide and prepared to take a closer look at Mairui and Mr. Kang's peep show." Unexpectedly, Hong King became barbaric. The four of them talked, laughed, and wandered for a while. Finally, they returned to the room, closed the door, resettled, and continued playing cards. The table has changed. Mairui keeps placing cards for Mr. Kang to eat and touch, making cards, inserting cards. Everything is given the green light. But I only pay close attention to Hong King, and can't click on one. The fight lasted until midnight, and there was air leakage from all sides of the house. A window upstairs blew open, making a gentle and sometimes noisy sound, Miss Wang said. Hong King went up to take a look. Hong King is silent. Mr. Kang tightened his collar and said, "It's a little cold," Mairui said. "Let's have a late-night snack, and I'll cook the vegetables and rice." Miss Wang said nothing. Han King said, "I'll come." So everyone stopped. Han King made rice, and the four of them ate. Mairui said to himself, "At night, I would be in the same room as Miss Wang," Han King said. "Yes." Mairui smiled and said, "I'm sorry, we broke up the couple. Actually, I can live in the kitchen room." Miss Wang smiled. Mr. King said, "I can live in the kitchen." Miss Wang said, "What if there are snakes, insects and hundreds of feet in the kitchen?" Mairui said politely, "Actually, I can live in a room with Mr. King, and they'll swallow the floor." Mr. King said, "Of course I swallow the floor. I don't care." Hearing this, Han King smiled, picked out a pair from the red plate and a pair from the white plate and said, "Everyone touches each other in a fair way. If they touch a pair, they will have sex." Miss Wang said with a smile that she was crazy again. 13 o'clock. Han King smiled, rubbed the four cards for a long time and said, "Touch." Mairui said with hesitation, "Mr. King would touch it first." Han King said, "Make a statement first. Do it when you touch it, and you will have no regrets when you turn over the cards." Mr. King touched the card, turned it over and knocked it, and it was red, Mairui said. Han King touched it. Han King made a gesture, walked around the table a few times, and asked Miss Wang to touch it. Mr. King said that he should be called my wife. Han King said, "His wife is too young and beautiful." Miss Wang didn't say anything. Her expression was tense. She slowly took out a card, pushed it, and it was a whiteboard. Mairui looked at Ding Han King. Han King said, "Look what I do. Touch it." Mei said, "Why should I touch it?" Ms. Wang said with a smile that in fact, if you touch one more picture, you will know the result, and you are not allowed to mess around. Mairui touched the tiles. Just like a mahjong veteran, he just twisted the tiles for a long time without turning them over. Han King said, "Tell me what brand it is." Mary was stunned, then slowly turned over the cards, a whiteboard. The initial excitement turned into a false alarm, and the stage became deserted. The four people stood up and chatted. Miss Wang also decided that she had no intention of staying here for a long time, and would return to Shanghai immediately tomorrow morning. Everyone goes back to their rooms. Mr. King fixed the head of the bed and said, "God is wise, otherwise I would be in trouble that night." Han King said, "Why?" Mr. King said, "If you really think about it, you can touch the cards and guess the room. You must have the brains." Han King is silent. Mr. King said, "It doesn't matter if I live in the same room as Miss Mei. But if I live in the same room as Han King's wife, Miss Wang, and we meet tomorrow morning, what can I say? What can I do?" Han King said, "What do you mean?" Mr. King said, "I can't tell you, it's clear. I just declared again and again and laid the floor all night." Miss Wang also proved that the two of us had a peaceful night. Han King would believe it. From then on, Han King has been thinking all over the place. You have to keep thinking, and you will never be able to figure out the real situation of this night. Did this man and woman make a living? Or do they go their own ways? The water is cold and clear. This night will always be blank to Han King. Just a story. Han King is silent. Mr. King said, "Similarly, if Han King and Mairui were in the same room, my wife would believe Han King and believe that Han King was innocent. No matter how good a couple is, they still have random thoughts. Husbands and wives are not as good as friends, and they will never believe it." Other side, Han King is silent. Mr. King said that we would definitely not be able to be friends. This night would be a riddle forever. Han King said, "Don't worry, if I get such a card, it must be Huang He." Mr. King said that it was nice to say it. Han King is silent. At this moment, there was an old-style large bed in the next room. Miss Wang had slipped into the depths of the curtain. Mairui unbuttoned the bed and slowly retracted into the homespun quilt. Miss Wang said that this bed must also belong to the Zhou family. In antique shop jargon, it is called Twilight Dang, which means climbing at night. Climbing high and far every night. Striving to be a pioneer, Mairui said with a smile. Do it 7 times and 3 times. Miss Wang said that the paneled panels on 3 sides were almost carved into a room. No wonder in the old society, there were 3 wives and 4 concubines. If the bed was not wide and comfortable, there would be no nightlife. Mairui said softly that even if the second bedroom is large, it should be separated. Miss Wang said, "Not sure. This tent is really wide. More than enough to accommodate a wife and 2 concubines, and 3 women singing a stage opera. This Mr. Zhou must have had sex with many women, and it is not peaceful at night," Mairui said. "Don't talk about it. I feel evil." Miss Wang said, "Here, there have been so many voices of men and women, and so many bad things have been done," Mairui said in a panic. "Stop, stop, stop talking. I think the pillow is dirty too," Miss Wang said, laughing and joking, hugging each other, and having fun with both sides. Mairui trembled all over and said, "Don't scare me." His hair stood on end. "Don't talk anymore." Miss Wang said, "When I think about it, it's a pity that a bow won't come this time." Meryl said nothing. Miss Wang said that a bow is good. Merriman said, "If you really want me to tell you, Mr. Kang is more graceful." Miss Wang said nothing. Mairui said, "I just don't understand. The relationship between Mr. Kang and Mrs. Kang is not bad." Miss Wang said, "What do you mean?" Mary said it was just a random thought. Miss Wang said that Mrs. Kang was really handsome, beautiful and gentle. The couple were in love with each other and were like lovers all their lives. It was said that they had a glass of wine every night. Meryl said nothing. Miss Wang said, "Therefore, it is impossible for Mr. Kang to have an affair." Meryl said nothing. Miss Wang said, "By the way, why doesn't Abo get married?" Mary said, "I don't understand." Miss Wang said, "She is too thoughtful, right?" Meryl said nothing. Ms. Wang said that she remembered how Abo was so attentive when discussing business. "I sat down and fixed the back of the chair. I stood up and helped put on my coat." Mairui said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. I only give you a few saccharin tablets at most. Is there any nutrition?" Miss Wang said nothing. Mairui said that Mr. Bao, an ordinary businessman, an ordinary Shanghai man, Mr. Kang is much more easygoing. Miss Wang said nothing. At this moment, there is a gust of wind at the door and window. 2 women have their own thoughts. The lamp is short and the night is long. The old bed and old tents, with layers of folds, gradually become thicker, heavier, and gradually blurred. The 4 of them returned to Shanghai another day and dispersed. That night, Miss Wang told Hong King that this Mairui was no longer right. The moment he opened his mouth, it was Mr. Kang. Hong King said, "Let's talk about her husband." Miss Wang said without saying a word. Hong King said that in this society, there is indeed a kind of woman who never talks about her husband. Miss Wang said, "What's the point? I won't talk about it anyway. In today's society, of course we have to talk about food, clothing, and other men, but…" Hong King said, "What?" Miss Wang said that there is a kind of woman who talks about romance, Paris, tea and life when she opens her mouth. This is the 13th point. Talking openly and silently about the baby bottles, diapers, vaccinations. The 13-point standard. As soon as I opened my mouth, I heard that my husband is long and my husband is short. This is a monster, Hong King said. Why? Ms. Wang said that it seems that China is a country of girls, and it is only short of men. Generally, women cannot issue marriage certificates, or they are all rural women. They live in urban and rural areas separately and do part-time jobs, make plaques, and sell foreign goods. They all stay in empty rooms alone. The doctor diagnosed 3. It was a stone girl whose fallopian tubes were blocked. Hong King huddled under the quilt, stretched out his hand, and said, "Honey, it's hard to hear. My husband is an old man. Don't talk about it in the future. If his male colleagues hear it, they will be upset." Miss Wang twisted her waist and said, "Why are you pulling me?" Hong King said, "It's getting late." Miss Wang said, "What are you doing?" "Writing bad checks every night is fun." 3. One afternoon, Mr. King and Mairui sat in the Green Cloud Tea House. Meili said, "I've been having a hard time lately." Mr. King said that the international trade is indeed not going well, and some companies are already relying on selling booths at the Canton Fair to make a living. Meili said, "I am talking about my own situation." Mr. King said nothing. Mairui said that he often thinks of his last spring outing. Mr. King said, "Right?" Mairui said, I can't believe that my mother-in-law recently ran into an old lover from the past. Mr. Kang said nothing. Mairui said, my parents have been separated for a long time. This old lover used to be Xiao Kai from Shanghai. He went to Hong Kong in the 1960s and resumed correspondence with my mother in the early 1980s. Unexpectedly, when we met recently, my mother had a quarrel with my father. We were arguing for divorce. We were planning to go to Hong Kong. We were planning to marry Xiao Kai. It was a mess. Mr. Kang said, go to Hong Kong to get married. Mairui said that my grandfather is a Hong Kong resident and lives alone. He always wanted to help my mother and go to Hong Kong. Now my mother has met her Hong Kong boyfriend and is confused. Mr. Kang, no sound, Mairui said. Speaking of it, this is a consistent practice. When my mother was in junior high school, she turned on the red light and went dancing with fashionable men every day. In the mid-1950s, before the Shanghai dance hall closed down, there were so many small dance halls. I recognized Xiao Kai and went out to dance every day, go in from one small dance hall to another, and go into 3 or 4 in one night. It was not unusual at all. I especially liked it. I went to the worst small dance halls to hang out. It was lower class than the dance halls in the old society where dances cost 1 yuan for 10 dances. My grandma was so miserable that she never dared to write a letter to tell my grandpa. She often went to look for her in the middle of the night, one by one, and cried. Later, my grandma passed away. Well, later on, when Mary talked about this, he suddenly stopped talking. Mr. Kang said that Shanghai is indeed a strange place. In the 1930s, in Beijing, Tianjin, Chengdu, etc. Although there were dance halls, they were all dancers from Shanghai. Mairui sneered and said, fortunately, my mother is not a woman from the old society. Otherwise, she would have been a dancer long ago. The famous dancers I admire most in my life are Shuang Dan, the dancers Zhou Danping and Jia Dan, who were born in a lady and became popular in Shanghai. Dimension, Mr. Kang said. What happened later? Mairui said sadly that I seem to have gone crazy. Whenever I opened my mouth, I would talk about private family matters. Mr. Kang said that it was mentioned in the book that it is easier for women to talk to men they are not familiar with. Mairui put down the teacup lightly and said, Mr. Kang said this, I'm not happy. Mr. Kang said, why? Mairui said, Kang must be a strange man, and I must be a frivolous woman. Mr. Kang said, I just let others to teach the fa. Mairui took a sip of tea and saw Mr. Kang saying, my mother-in-law caused my grandmother's death before, but now she's starting to mess with me. She's ready to kill me. When it comes to dancing, Mr. Kang thinks of his wife in the 1980s. In college, Kang was always an active dancer and won awards in college. The next time I went on a business trip to Beijing, I rushed to my alma mater at night to visit my classmate, the prom prince of that year. The two met on the south lawn. Mr. Kang found that the familiar colored lights deep in the campus were still flickering. Mr. Kang said that there will be a dance on Saturday. The prince said, yes. Now that Xiao Kong is the boss, his feet are more itchy, but they are no longer itchy at all. Mr. Kang said that if you don't jump for a long time, you will almost forget it. The prince smiled and said, how can you forget the basic skills? Let's go dance again tonight. Mr. Kang said, yes, but I can only sit and not dance. The old social dance hall taught the fa and set up a calligraphy booth to take a look and reminisce about the past. And that was enough. The prince smiled, and the two of them walked towards the dance floor and approached the door. The prince pulled Mr. Kang and said, Xiao Kang, you know how to look at women. Mr. Kang said, what? The prince said that young women today are different from those many years ago, when they only preferred educated men. Mr. Kang said, now, the prince said, do you understand the market economy? Women are already picky. When a well-off man walks into the venue, he must look carefully. Now, in the university dance hall, in addition to female students from our college, many are young women and female residents from outside the college. Therefore, it depends on the dress and temperament. If the other party is dressed as a female student and well-off invites you, You can claim to be the owner of a small restaurant at the back door of the university. If the other party is Xiao Jiabiu, she is dressed in bright clothes, has an arrogant air, and is basically a social little girl who comes in from the outside. Xiao Kong will call herself an associate professor of the school, and she has proven herself in every attempt. Mr. Kang smiled and said, "Why is this?" The prince patted Mr. Kang on the shoulder and said, "I really don't understand, so I should just pretend to be confused." Mr. Kang said nothing. The prince said, "This is complementarity. You understand. Now, it is not fashionable to dance to the end. You can bring it out by spinning a few songs. If Xiao Kong speaks well, the other party will follow quickly. The two of them have a little meal first. Then, everything can be more direct. You see." Mr. Kang was startled. The prince said, "What's the point of dancing too much? If you stick to it until the end, you are usually a member of the Cancer Club." When Mr. Kang thought of this, he noticed that Mairui's eyes were red. He lowered his head and took out a photo from his handbag and put it on the coffee table. Mairui said, "My mother asked me to print this. It's not very decent and doesn't sound like a good thing." Mr. Kang took a look and saw a set of full-body photos on the dance floor. A charming woman in her late 50s, in a jade-colored replica satin skirt, with a slim waist, plump breasts, and a figure that was charming and eye-catching. Add 1 point for being too naughty. Take away 1 point. To plain. There are several photos of a couple. The woman is close to a tan man. He is over 50 years old, with flat shoulders, a V-neck black dance suit, and national standard soft-soled dance shoes. The whole body is shaking with heat. The real man has a few streaks of sweat on his face. Comparative score: slightly dark man, with strong bones, and steel, and electric eyes. The picture at the bottom is a recent photo of them kissing during the dance. Mr. Kang felt that every photo was stunning. The facial structure of Asians kissing is different from that of Caucasians. They are easily deformed and have a lot of sensual content. This photo is just right and not vulgar. Mr. Kang said that your father is young and has a handsome boyfriend, so he is worthy of her. Mairui said, "What's the point of talking nonsense? My mother is an old woman in her late 60s and her boyfriend is 2 years younger. She took the photo like this because she wanted to stimulate my father and let me be handed over to him." Divorce. Mr. Kang said nothing. Mary said it was like two king snakes that had taken aphrodisiacs. Outside the tea house, raindrops lingered on the eaves and banana trees dripped. Mr. Kang took a sip of tea. Mary said, "I'm embarrassed. As soon as I sat down, I had an attack." Mr. Kang said, "I understand." Mary said that he wanted to talk about something else, about walking in the countryside, and to people looking at the moon, and not thinking about mom at all. Mr. Kang said that the younger generation can only watch from the sidelines when it comes to parents. Mairui sighed and said, "My mother is quite special. She has been in trouble since she was a child. She has to wear clothes and dress up. My grandpa told me that every day, she would follow a bunch of hairy crabs behind her." Mr. Kang said, "I used to recognize a dancing prince, but now I see a dancing queen and a dancing emperor, and I am deeply impressed." Mei Rui laughed and said, "I'm most worried about it. It is this emperor who restored communication with my mother-in-law in the 1980s. At that time, my mother-in-law wanted to meet Xiao Kai every time she went to Hong Kong to visit her grandfather. Didn't Xiao Kai go to Japan? It's Singapore. For many years, Xiao Kai has been avoiding meeting each other. Unexpectedly, one day, my mother-in-law happened to bump into Xiao Kai face-to-face while passing by Nanjing Road. It's strange, the two of them stopped on the road in a daze. My mother's tears were just like that. It fell. Kang always said it was like a movie." Mei Ru has said that because of this, her mother kept a close eye on Xiao Kai. Even if fate came, she couldn't cut him open with a knife. She even called Xiao Kai's name in her dreams, but she still couldn't tell what Xiao Kai was thinking. My mother-in-law said that Xiao Kai really didn't expect that her mother-in-law's appearance was still beautiful. She must not believe her mother-in-law's photos. After meeting her, they understood. The two of them got close to each other for more than a week. After that, Xiao Kai treated her to a treat. Mom took me to Shinya for dinner. As soon as I entered the restaurant that day, I felt that Xiao Kai's eyes were strange. Let me tell you, should I call Hong Kong uncle, or aunt? Mom said she was going to call daddy soon. Xiao Kai, let's talk about it with a smile, called Xiao Kai. I am more natural. My mother-in-law said that you can call me uncle. Xiao Kai laughed and said, call me Xiao Kai, I will be younger. I didn't ring at the time. From then on, I called her Xiao Kai. Later I found out that my mother was already jealous that night. A few days later, Xiao Kai called me and asked me to advise my mother not to rush for a divorce. This would be better for everyone. But when I tried to persuade her, my mother jumped 3 times and exploded. My mother said that discord between husband and wife, long-term separation, divorce and marriage will eventually break out. Let me tell you. What is an outbreak? A world war is an outbreak. Mom said, it's not called an outbreak. It's called the second spring. Okay, it's equivalent to peach blossoms blooming in one season. Mr. Kang said that it is equivalent to picking minky and tea twice a year. Mairui said, I have said that the second spring is good, the clouds are good, and the relationship is good, but if you keep thinking about spring all year round in your small happiness, how can you do this? My mother-in-law said, I don't care, I want a divorce and get married. I am a decent woman, I must feel pain in my heart. I smiled to my mother and said that Xiao Kai must be unwilling to get married. Maybe 1 year's energy really needs to be used for 4 years. Just like my old client A Bao, who has always been single and went out to hang out. There is also a Shanghai-born lawyer who likes half-hearted marriages. His wife has long gone abroad. Mr. Kang said nothing. Mairui said that Lao Mao's highest order was that it was going to rain and my mother was going to get married. What could I do? It would be better to take less care, but I was upset. Mr. Kang said nothing and looked out the window, rain hitting the banana trees. Mairui said, Mr. Kang has remained silent until now. Mr. Kang hesitated and said, what am I talking about? Mairui said charmingly, whatever, I want to hear everything. Mr. Kang hesitated and said, I think Mairui should be patient and do more work. Of course, he can also keep out of sight, but I really can't tell. Mairui said nothing.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.